We get to visit with Jimmy Hyams each and every Wednesday, and we love that. Jimmy, let me start with your column on Joe Milton. And you were one of the first to say that you like Joe Milton, that he brings a lot to the table, but it was a couple of weeks ago, said you didn't think that Tennessee's offense could run at a high level without Joe Milton. You've been proved exactly right. And Tennessee has to win in different ways. But what are your thoughts on Joe Milton after seeing him for a couple more weeks? I would encourage people to check out the column on offthehooksports.com.
I thought it would be better than he's been. And I admitted that I was influenced by his offensive MVP performance against Clemson in the Orange Bowl. I was influenced by the fact he was in the system for the third year with Josh Heupel. I was influenced by what I thought would be a pretty good receiving core. I knew they would miss Jalen Hyatt and Cedric Tillman, but I thought Dante Thornton was going to be a good addition. I thought Brew McCoy was a really good receiver. I thought Squirrel White would do well. And Ramel Keaton has regressed. So this receiving core, frankly, is not that good. And I think all of those things have added up to where Joe Milton's not been that effective. I think there are at least 8 or 9 quarterbacks in the SEC that are playing better than Joe Milton. I thought he'd be among the top 5 quarterbacks in the SEC. He's not. And then you get into this difficulty, and I think this is a real concern. If you go to Nico, you may lose that locker room because there are a lot of the players in there that love Joe Milton.
Love him.
However, if Joe Milton goes 9 for 30 against Alabama with 3 interceptions, you don't have a choice. So,
no, and you're right about the locker room. Everybody loves him in that locker room, but I think they also love winning. So if Nico on the flip side went out there and went 26 of 32 for 420 yards and Tennessee wins big in game X, whatever that might be, I think the players would be won over pretty quickly. The worst case scenario is if you made a change and Nico played incredibly average.
I agree with that. And I think back to a few years ago when Clemson had a quarterback named Kelly Bryant, who they thought was going to be a good quarterback, and he struggled. And they went with Trevor Lawrence, which a lot of people thought was a bit of a gamble. But Lawrence played so well, everybody shut up, said, okay, we get it. And Kelly Bryant transferred, and there wasn't a problem. So, Dave, to your point, if Nico were to come in and play really well like Trevor Lawrence did, then that would be okay. If he didn't, you got a problem.
Yep, you certainly do, Caleb.
Yeah, I actually think back to right before that switch happened, and that was the national title game the year before with Alabama and Georgia. Jalen Hurts had bought way more goodwill than anybody, and they benched him at halftime of the national title game, and Tua brought them back. So, Jimmy, can Joe Milton – I know, Tennessee can't beat Alabama, Joe Milton playing the way he's played. Can they beat Alabama if he can just up his level to, say, the way T. Martin played the first 5 games of the 98 season, where Martin struggled but made key plays when necessary and wasn't necessarily poor, just wasn't great?
I think you would be in the ball game with a chance to win. You could certainly beat Alabama if he plays the way he did against Clemson. Anything short of that, I don't know if you would beat Alabama. I think, and here's the other thing too about Alabama, they're not great, but they've also got revenge on their side. Tennessee had revenge on its side when it played South Carolina, right? And look what happened. So Alabama's going to play at an elevated level against Tennessee. I am convinced of that. So an average performance by Joe Milton is not good enough. He's got to play, in my opinion, to beat Alabama, he's got to play at a higher level than that, because I think Tennessee is going to get maybe Alabama's best game of the year.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to something that somebody said that Jimmy and I both enjoyed watching play, and it's for some reason it stuck with me, and it was Troy Aikman. He said at one point, the best attribute a quarterback can have is accuracy. And to take that a step further, I played Jimmy Hyams in racquetball, and there's something about having natural hand-eye coordination. I've got some physical ability, but natural hand-eye coordination, Jimmy has more. And he almost beat me left-handed. When his
almost.
Yeah, whatever. And so his elbow was hurting. But Jimmy, I think some of that really is innate. I think that I know you were a good shooter. I never saw you shoot, but in basketball, I think I could go out there and practice for 3 months and work on my free throw shooting and get a little bit better. And you and I have had this discussion before, but I think you can go from average to better, but I don't think the guys like Reggie Miller that knocked down 95% of their free throws, I don't think that's just practice. I think there's something innate in them.
I agree with that. I think there's a natural ability to do a lot of those things. You can probably go from a 60% free throw shooter to 70 or 75. You don't go from 60 to 90. And I think the same thing with a passer. Now, I'll say this, that there may be one exception to what I think is a rule. And I think Jalen Hurts has maybe improved as a passer more than any quarterback I can remember, because he was not all that accurate through college, and now all of a sudden he's throwing more accuracy at Philadelphia. But yeah, I think typically you either have it or you don't. You can get a little bit better. You can go from a 250 hitter to maybe 280 or 290, but you can't go from 250 to 333. So yeah, and I think Milton. I think what we're seeing, he sort of is what he is. The other thing that I believe, and I guess Tennessee could argue with it, I don't think Tennessee runs his own read anymore. I think they're predetermined calls. I think Joe Milton's handed it off regardless. And if it is a read, then he does a poor job of that, because I have seen multiple times when if he had kept the ball, he'd have run for 10 or 12 yards without being touched. So I think it's a predetermined read on their part, which to me handcuffs the offense.
Well, it's a good way. It's also a good way to get your quarterback killed. If he's making the decision, or the coaches are making the decision whether or not he should keep or hand off, but in particular keep, and you can run into the wrong defensive end and get hammered pretty quick, Caleb.
Well, but think about. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Jimmy.
Go ahead. I just think about how many times he has kept it. How many times did he keep it on a zone read against A&M? The answer, 0. Now, he ran an option. That's not a zone read. And he kept it a couple of times on scrambles. I'm convinced that play against Texas San Antonio on the first play of the game was a predetermined call. They told Joe, you keep it regardless. And he ran for 81 yards because the road runners crashed in, which almost everybody does because they don't respect his run. Caleb?
Yeah, so Jimmy, on those lines, are we sure it's not Joe just making poor reads and refusing to run with it? Because look, the decision-making we're seeing from him is starting to it's getting worse. There were 2 plays we talked about, Dave and I, on Saturday after the game that I can't get past. One is obviously interception in the red zone. Gary Danielson even had to say that's an elementary mistake that a 6-year quarterback should not make. That was an obvious read on the safety that you can't make. The other one, though, was early in the game when he's running for the first down on a free play, and he steps out of bounds before the marker, and the marker's right in front of him. He sees where the first down marker is. So is it possible that Joe Milton could be just that bad of a decision maker where he's not keeping it on the reads?
Is it possible? Yes. But after watching him this many times, I think they have taken the decision making out of his hands because he's not a good decision maker. So I think they've taken it away from him and said, you're going to hand it off. And Caleb, I agree with you. He doesn't really like to run. But then I found it intriguing in the second half, he decides to run over 2 people and get up and woof at them. Where has that been? What? So I don't get that. And he should have done it on the first down you're referring to. If he had to try to run over somebody, he should have, instead of running out of bounds about 1.5 yards or 2 yards short of a first down. So just in watching him, and I try to study this, and look, I may be wrong, but I don't see him reading this. I see him just handing it off because he does it consistently, even though he has got wide open space quite often when you see the defensive end or the edge rusher or the outside linebacker crashing down. That's what's convinced me that it's a predetermined call.
This is going to sound really harsh, but I want to clarify. I don't think Joe Milton is dumb. I have no reason to believe that. I think that there's a difference between walking around street smarts or book smarts and football smarts. I think those are 3 completely different things. He may be the smartest guy on the football team, but I've seen enough to wonder, Jimmy, if his football IQ is significantly lower than what we've become accustomed to out of a starting quarterback.
So here's what I've been told in that regard. You get him in the quarterback room, the film room, and he's really good. He knows what to do. He knows what he's supposed to do. He knows who to throw it to. He knows what the defenses are. He knows how to read it. And then he gets on the football field and it doesn't translate. So I think his football IQ during the course of a game is not very good. His awareness, going back to what Caleb said, he runs out of bounds 1.5 yards or 2 yards short of a first down. You got to be aware of that. So I don't think that he plays with the high football IQ the way Hendon Hooker did. But if you get him on a chalkboard, he's fine.
Yep, that's exactly what I meant. And you might get an A+ in Spanish too, which I almost failed at UT. But there's a football IQ thing going on that and listen, John Adams, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he talked about that Ole Miss game. He said that was the kind of play that you may not ever overcome. Not that he couldn't overcome that play, but that's just the way he processes the game.